Padres fans know and love, and haven't had him on the pod for a while. So excited about that. Excited to pick his brain about the team, about what this time of year is like, and how a prospect and a team knows that it's time to give it a go. So we'll pick his brain on that, amongst other topics. Derek is off this week, but I'm sure we will catch up with him once things get going in Peoria. On Friar, of course, brought to you by OG's. Be on the lookout for some new OG's menu items. OG's, of course, a great place to watch whatever your game of choice is. Big one coming up Sunday in the NFL. Maybe you want to watch some spring training baseball here in a couple of weeks, NBA, NHL, whatever's going on. OG's the place to do it. Award-winning beers. You can make use of their loyalty program. It's super easy. You can do it online, earn loyalty points, which leads to rewards, exclusive offers, fun, and free food. And ordering online from OG's is easier than ever to get OG's straight to your door. Without further ado, the welcome music. It is the On Friar podcast, brought to you by NBC 7. Excited to talk Padres with a guy that I always get a smile on my face whenever I see him strolling into the clubhouse. He is the 6'7" righty. He always has a smile on his face. I mean, the sunny demeanor and disposition. We need the positivity of Bob Scanlan in the world, especially now. And excited to catch up with you. How are you, Scan?
Renee, I'm doing great. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on. And you're cheating me out of it in 6'8". Don't cheat me out of that.
Well, then we need to go to the folks at the Baseball Reference site.
You're singing my song. So since I signed as a 17-year-old at 6'7", probably 145 pounds, I was just a string bean. And then over the next couple of years, I grew a little bit more, but they never updated my media guide. And every team I went to, and believe me, there were a few because they couldn't get rid of me fast enough. But I kept saying, hey, can we update that at some point? But anyway, it's still there. It is in Baseball Reference, my stats when I I was 17 years old. So anyway, it's great to see you. It is that time of the year. Are you fired up?
Yeah.
It's spring time.
I'm fired up, and it's been, man, what an off season. A lot has happened, obviously, and I think we're always kind of chomping at the bit whenever this time of year rolls around. But with so many there's just a lot of intrigue going into this spring training. Whereas there's obviously tons of excitement last year because the team was so loaded. This year, and there were new pieces and all that. Now it's like getting used to some new guys. Yep. Who's going to fill these holes? What are we going to see from the young guys and the prospects, health wise? How are Manny and Joe and you? And so there's just a lot of interesting storylines. And while it might not be as bright and sunny in the Padres world as it was this time last year, just from an intrigue standpoint, I think there's a lot to kind of pay attention to and to be excited about as things kind of get rolling.
Oh, no question about it. And all the things that you brought up are sort of the normal spring training questions that we have, right? I mean, I'm just thinking about it. It's, I have that internal clock. I've been doing this. This is my 40th season in professional baseball now. And it's just like, okay, it's that time of the year. And all those questions that you just went through, I'm thinking those are the same things, different names, maybe like a different injury list, different set of prospects, different holes you got to fill on your own. But that's the fun of it, is coming into spring training and trying to figure out, okay, how is this all going to blend together? And, you were talking about last season and how bright it was. It was almost blinding in a way, wasn't it? Because and I think maybe some of us did get blinded in a certain way in terms of, oh my gosh, look at all these names. And it was just so exciting to standing at the batting cage and you're looking at, 4 or 5 potential Hall of Famers all waiting their turn to take their hacks. And at the same time, it was a great reminder of, it's about how a team comes together, right? And that's what it's all about. And that's what the excitement is about this year, I think, is just seeing, okay, we have some of the cornerstone pieces that have made this team so exciting over the last few years are still here. And there's going to be a bunch of new faces as well. So how does this come together? How does this come together with a new manager? We have new coaches on staff. There's going to be a lot of new faces in the starting rotation. What the strengths were of this team last year and some of maybe the weaknesses are flip-flopped in some ways this year. So how is that going to play out? So I just love it. I love this time of the year, and I love the anticipation of trying to figure out how is this all going to play out. And you and I are going to get a chance to see it here starting next week when the boys are out there and it all begins.
Yeah, so when you get there, give me a sense of like day in the life of Bob Scanlan in Peoria, and like what a day is like for you. Obviously, there's time in the clubhouse. You get to hear from Mike Schilt. But especially once you get out in the field and you get a chance to like get your eyes on guys and see how is this guy looking? What is this guy doing? What is he not doing? Like what is a day typically like for you and somebody that has a more astute eye than I would? Like what are you really focused on and looking for?
Honestly, it starts for me the moment that I get to the ballpark. And as I'm walking in, I'm paying attention, and this is whatever, 7:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, whatever it may be. And I'm curious, who's out here? Who's out on the field right now? There's somebody taking swings in the batting cage. I can hear. Let's go take a peek. Who's getting the early work in? Oh, who's over in the bullpen area working on their framing with Riley Westman or one of the catching coaches? Which guys are out there getting some extra stretching in? And then from there, so I'm always curious about who's getting their work in, right? Which sometimes you see young guys, sometimes you see the veteran guys. Is there a young guy watching what the veteran guy is doing? Oh, Manny Machado is out here an hour and a half before we even have to stretch, and he's getting some work into the cake. Maybe I should be doing that. So for me, it just starts off with who's out here. And then I get into the clubhouse, and that's fun as well, because I also want to see, as you do, I know as well, like what's the interaction? What's the feel? What groups are talking to who's making the rounds? Who are the new guys? How are they handling themselves? Are they more the quiet guy that's hanging out in their locker, or is it the new guy an extrovert? And he's walking around getting into everybody's mix and having some fun. So there's a lot of things that I'm actually trying to watch and absorb and listen to, and not necessarily make a judgment on, but because things change so much in spring training. And that's the other fun part about it, is what you see at the beginning is not what you're going to see at the end, but it is kind of fun to watch how it evolves, both with the physical side of it, the personality side of it. And so that's part of it for me before even guys start doing their stretch for the day. Then once that starts, then it's eyes on, like you were saying. Okay, let's watch the bullpens. Who's got command of his fastball right now? Which side are they missing to? Watching Ruben and Ben Fritz and the rest of the staff talking to guys. What are they working on? Little things, little tweaks. What do I see? How's the rookie handling himself? How's the young framing? Is there an interaction? All these types of things. And it's nonstop, right? Because one day you've got 15 pitchers out there. The next day it's 15 new guys out there throwing, and you got 75 guys that you're trying to keep track of. I'm taking notes along the way to just say, okay, day one, I saw this kid throw good command of the fastball to the arm side, good two-seamer, slider. He was getting underneath it a little bit, whatever it may be, so that I can look back at my notes and 2 weeks later say, oh, okay, now he's starting to get command of both sides of the plate with the fastball. And Ruben talked to him about the grip on that slider, and now we're starting to see it's got a little bit more bite to it, whatever it may be. So same thing with the hitters, who's looking good, who's showing up in shape, who's getting to the fastball, who's working on things, who's staying inside the ball, just all those types of things. And then the live stuff starts, right, where the live pitchers are facing the hitters, and it's the same thing. So probably a lot of the same things that you're looking at, we're all watching and trying to discern, okay, who's doing what, who's opening up eyes, who showed up in shape, who's actually got a chance to do something this spring, and how is this evolving? And Darnay, as you know, it changes every day, right? Yeah. And I remember having coaches talking to me, they would, after the first week or the second week, and sometimes multiple times during spring training, be like, hey, guys, just be aware. We're watching. We know this thing is evolving. Stay on your toes. Good job last week. You better keep it going this week, because things can change in a hurry. And they do it both to try to encourage the guys that maybe feel like they got off to a bad start, but also to keep the guys that feel like they got off to a good start from getting complacent. So, I mean, that's just some of the stuff that I'm looking at early on. And it's, like I said, it changes every day, which keeps it fun every day.
How much of a challenge is it to kind of maintain the intensity? And I guess it's maybe a microcosm of what you see during the season because it is such a long season and there are so many reps. But if it's a young guy or somebody trying to prove themselves, and maybe it's a little bit different for pitchers rather than a hitter that every day is going to get in the cage and get a certain amount of hacks or getting a certain amount of fly balls and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But what's the challenge of like when their eyes on you being dialed for every single rep and not just kind of going through the motions in the cage or through a kind of an infield workout or whatever it may be?
Yeah, it can drain on you after a while, right? Especially if you're a young guy, you're trying to prove yourself. The veteran guys, they're out there, they're getting in shape, they're having fun, and part of their fun is razzing the rookies, right? So as a rookie, not only are you trying to impress the coaches, but you're probably putting up with a lot of extra stuff from the boys, just giving you a hard time. But yeah, that's part of it. And I think that's why it's so important, especially for some of those young guys, to show up in shape. If they played winter ball, if they've done something, so that they come in and they're sharp right from the get-go, because you're not going to be on your best every single day. And there's also a pacing to it so that you don't burn yourself out in spring training. And that's what you see with a lot of young guys also trying to do too much too early. I did it. I injured my shoulder one year trying to outthrow Steve Carlton. He was on the mound next to me, and I'm like, I'm going to throw as hard as Steve Carlton. Nobody cares if I'm throwing as hard as Steve Carlton. But in my mind, I'm thinking I've got to prove something here. And sure enough, I ended up straining my shoulder, and I'm not doing anything for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So it's a learning experience for these young guys for sure, both on the physical side and the emotional side of how do I handle myself like a big leaguer? And that's the beautiful thing, is when you've got veteran guys around you, like the Manny Machados and the Xander Bogarts and the Joe Musgroves and the Yu Darvishes and those types of guys. What a great environment for these youngsters to learn from in terms of how is this veteran handling himself, both physically during practice, pre-practice, post-practice, in terms of your recovery and everything, and just how to handle yourself in the clubhouse with the rest of the guys and just help yourself to acclimate.
You broke camp with the Cubs in 91. Yeah. 24 age season, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I actually didn't break camp. So what happened was I was traded. I was in the Philly organization for 7 years, and what a great organization to be a part of at that time. I learned so much about baseball, and I think it really prepped me for both my baseball playing career and also for my post career in the broadcast world. But I was actually traded it was like the last day of spring training, along with Chuck McElroy, to the Philadelphia. I was in the Phillies. We got traded to the Cubs for the Wild Thing, Mitch Williams. So he went over to the Cubs. Chuck and I went over to he went to the Phillies. We went over to the Cubs. Chuck got called up right away. I was sent down to Des Moines. So it was about 2 weeks into the season before I got called up. And when I got called up, it was because Mike Harkey, who was one of the pitchers for the Cubs at the time and still a good friend, had injured his shoulder. And so they had traded for me. It was trying to make that trade look good. Chuck was already doing a nice job. I was like, all right, let's call up Scanlan. So I was grateful. I got the call. And when I got there, they told me, do not get comfortable. You are only here for a couple of days. And, we don't think Mike's going to be down that long. So you're here for a cup of coffee. Congratulations, kid. And the next thing you know, I was able to put together 9 years in the big leagues. So you never know how things are going to work out, but I was certainly grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, excuse me. Your first appearance, May 7th. So like you said, a few weeks into the season. And I think I know why you stuck around. 7 shutout innings in your debut. Did so with just a single strikeout.
Yeah, yeah. I don't miss many bats, Darnay.
That's
I
impressive.
was a contact guy, pitch to contact type guy. I don't know that I'd even get drafted maybe in this day and age when it's all about power, four-seam fastball guys up in the zone. But yeah, my debut, thank goodness, was at the Astrodome, a great pitcher's park. I got some run support early. I think George Bell might have driven in a couple of runs for me early, and I was grateful to walk away with my first win. But yeah, I was never a strikeout guy. I was a power sinker pitcher, pitch to contact, and was perfectly happy getting a ground ball out. And that's basically how I did it.
And your next start against Atlanta, 6 2/3, 3 earned, 11 hits. Your first 4 starts, you got through with a 1.59 ERA. You had back-to-back starts of 7+ innings with 1 earned run. And so no wonder you put together a good year.
And then they figured me out. After that.
So what did you notice after that? Because you hear people talk about that all the time. And a funny one that always, and maybe it's just because it was when I started covering the team, was 2019. Nick Margavchis was like the surprise fifth starter, came out, had like 3 great starts, and then things kind of just tailed off for him. And you hear people talk about all the time, teams, they figure you out, they scout you. What did you notice after those first few starts? You're like, oh, this stuff that was working isn't quite working anymore. Now I have to adapt to them.
Yeah, it was a combination of things. So for me, first of all, I think there's also the adrenaline factor, right? When you first get called up, you are just so amped and pumped up. You're like, I can run through a wall. Let's do this thing. And then after 4 or 5 starts, eventually it's like, okay, the adrenaline's wearing off right now. And I'm a little bit exhausted. And I've had family and friends coming out to all these games, and it's just been this whirlwind of just excitement and fun and euphoria, and things are going well. And at some point, it just you just kind of crash a little bit. And I think so. It was a combination of that, along with the league figuring out, okay, now we know what this guy does. He's a 2-seam type guy. He's going to go slider. He's one-sided with a slider. He's usually on this side of the plate with his 2-seam fastball. And granted, I think nowadays they figure that stuff out so much faster than they did back in my day. They didn't. We didn't have cell phones. I mean, there was no. The guys were not sending videos or scouting reports to each other via text. It took longer for the league to figure some things out. Nowadays they know what these guys do. Back when they were coming out of high school and college and A-ball, so they're on it a lot quicker now. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was having to become more 2-sided with my fastball. I had to start moving feet a little bit more. Guys were getting comfortable. They knew I was a strike thrower. So, okay, they dug in. So I had to start moving feet a little bit more. I had to start using my split finger more because guys were looking fastball slider. So I just had to start making adjustments that I didn't have to make in the minor leagues as much, just because you have the stuff. But in the big leagues, the stuff only plays for so long. And that was part of the growing and learning experience for me. And also realizing that I can't throw the ball by everybody, and I don't need to throw every pitch as hard as I possibly can. That was a big learning lesson for me. And fortunately, I had one of the best in the business around me to help me make that adjustment, in Greg Maddox, who was my teammate at the time. And so to have Mad Dog there to talk about things, and he'd be like, hey kid, have you thought about this? Have you tried this? Think about that. So I was very fortunate in that I had some veteran guys around me, some great coaches as well. In a time where guys took pride in trying to help other players. And we'd sit there after the games in the clubhouse, and you'd sit there for an hour and a half and talk baseball. What happened in that game? What were you thinking in that situation? Hey, Scan, just so you know, from a hitter standpoint, if I'd gotten to that count in that situation, here's what I've been looking for. So getting the input from your fellow teammates who are hitters, pitchers who are having success. I mean, that was, I think, one of the. They ask you, what do you miss about the game? That's one of them. Just the camaraderie and the interaction and the sharing of knowledge of the game to, afterwards and beforehand, to try to make yourself better. So, I was really fortunate that I had those learning experiences. I had to make the adjustment. And for the next 9 years, it was all about who's adjusting to who. And that was the cat and mouse game, the chess match that went on.
You went opposite Smoltz in that start against Atlanta. So this wasn't a fully formed Braves team, like you said, with Maddox. They didn't have McGriff yet. The Braves were coming into their own. But that's cool. I think everybody's wondering now, like, and it's more so position players than pitchers with this current iteration. There are obviously some notable arms in the farm system, some younger that might need a couple years. There's guys like Iriarte, Mazer, who might be up at some point this year, but so much of the focus is on
a lot of guys,
the Paulies, the Marcys, the Merrills. I'm curious, from your standpoint, what does ready look like? Like, did you know you were ready? Because when you arrived, like, you weren't the kind of guy that was back and forth, right? So I'm curious, from your standpoint, like, how do you gauge a player's readiness? Is there such a thing as ready, or do you sometimes is it just need, like your situation, where you get thrown into it and hope that a player can stick?
Yeah, well, bear in mind, my situation also was I signed when I was 17. So I'd spent 7 years in the minor leagues. So it was one of those things of, okay, you should be seasoned by now. So here you go. Let's figure it out if you got what it takes. But and I think back in my era, there was much more a sense of, okay, yeah, guys need to have whatever it is, a minimum of 700 innings in the minor leagues before he's ready to go to the big leagues. And there was, I think, a different accountability in terms of, you did not go from A ball to double A until that A ball manager was confident that he was going to send you to that double A team. And that double A manager was not going to be wondering, what the heck are they teaching down there in A ball? Why are you sending me this? Right. And the same thing from double A to triple A, and for sure to the big leagues. I think you needed to be a polished product to go to the next level. And maybe to a detriment to some point, because what we're seeing now is, I think, a lot more openness to having young guys come up, and they're not necessarily a finished or polished product at all. But this is how they're going to get there. More younger guys are getting opportunities now to show what they can do at an earlier stage in their career. And I think part of it also is that they are so exceptional at a certain part of their game that they can do it at the big league level. So again, in my generation, it was, okay, you can hit, that's fine, but you better be able to play second base or outfield or whatever it is. And you had to have the entire package. There was little room for, hey, you're learning at the big leagues. Of course, you're going to learn, but you had to be sharp at your entire game for the most part. Nowadays, I think if you're exceptional at something, you're going to get a much better and sooner opportunity, because you can hit, dude. You can flat out hit. Bat to ball contact, you've got it. You've got a good eye. If you're a power guy, you can put up 25, 30, 40 home runs. Okay, kid, go get them. Learn at the big league level. We'll work on the outfield play. We'll work on the base running. We'll work on your positioning yourself on defense and knowing where to sort of lean and cheat and all those other types of things. You can learn that at the big leagues. We're willing to take the mistakes that you might make on that side of the ball because you're so exceptional at this other side. And so I think in a way it's good because it's fun for fans. And I think it's good for the game as well, because we're getting a chance to see some of these exceptional athletes that are so darn good earlier in their careers. And no, they're not finished products, but it sure is fun getting a chance to watch them become finished products and watching them do what they do exceptionally well in the meantime.
How much development can take place through the course of a spring training? So if it is a guy like a Jacob Marcy who arrives sometime early next week, he's there through the first couple weeks of workouts and they're playing games. He's involved in games, getting regular at bats, that sort of thing. We obviously think about the traditional sense of spend a couple months in double A. If you're hitting well, maybe you move up to triple A or X amount of at-bats beyond whatever level. There was a lot of talk about, what he did in the Arizona Fall League. And then you hear people say, well, the pitching was particularly bad this year in the Arizona Fall League. So it's hard, whether or not you can classify that as like his development. I don't know. It's reps. Probably feels good to hit a bunch of homers. But what does that mean? I'm curious, like, people don't necessarily talk about spring training as like part of the developmental process, but how much growth can take place for a guy that arrives, say, February 12th, and, by the time games roll around a month and a half, 2 months later?
Yeah, it can definitely happen, right? And the other part of all of this is the internal makeup of each player, right? Because, we're talking about, okay, you're exceptional at something. We're going to give you a chance to prove it at the big league level. Now, if that kid fails, how is he going to handle the failure? That's another part of it. And some of that can get revealed in spring training. How's the kid handling it? How is he handling being in the big league clubhouse? How is he handling facing big league pitching? He just got embarrassed right there on a 2-0 slider that, he swung out of his shoes and he spun down and fell down, or he just embarrassed himself defensively. And how's he going to rebound? So again, it was sort of what we were talking about earlier of the fun of coming to spring training and seeing all these young kids, seeing the nervousness, seeing the butterflies in some cases, seeing the mistakes, but that's expected to happen. The question is now, how do you respond to that? And so, yeah, I do believe that there can be a lot of development during spring training. You do have to be careful, as you mentioned, the weak pitching in the fall league this year. The same thing goes on early on in spring training, right? Where a guy gets off to a hot start and you're thinking, oh, he's tearing it up. He's hitting 300 or 400. He's hitting 440 so far. Yeah, but who's he facing? Are these guys, it's such a different game when the bell rings for the first game of the season. And so you want to see that growth. You want to see that development. Quite frankly, I like to see some failure along and see how the kid rebounds and responds to it. So by the end of spring, he's been through all the things that you and I have just talked about in terms of, okay, the physicality of it, playing every day, playing on the harder fields, playing at the major league level, trying to prove something every single day that you're out there, not just in the games, but in the practice sessions and everything else. Mentally, how are you holding up through it? And so I do believe that there's something that you can prove and that there's development to be made over the course of spring training. And for some of those kids, it's just the confidence of saying, I've always wondered how I would do. I've been killing it at A-ball and AA, and now I got a chance to come to big league camp. And I held my own. I belong here. Sometimes that's a big step for these young players. So I think there's a lot that you can learn from it. And a case in point, the guy that really impressed me last spring was Jackson Merrill. Not just because of how he looked at the plate, and there were some things I loved his approach and what he was doing early in the count and 2 strikes, and then talking to him about it, just his mental process, like, holy smokes, this kid's got it going on. He knows what he's doing up there. But the thing that impressed me the most, Darnay, was watching him make a couple of errors in one of the games at shortstop, and it didn't fluster him at all. He was just like, okay, very next play, boom, he went to his left, was able to get his feet underneath him. He made the play. I was like, that's awesome. That kid just showed that he's not going to get flustered. He's not getting inside his head. He's not second guessing himself just because he made an error out of shortstop. He came right back out and rebounded. So that as a coach, as a front office person, those are the types of things I'm watching to say, is this kid ready? There's stuff he's got to work on. But I think even if he has those stumbling blocks at the big league level, he's going to learn from it, and he's not going to get knocked down and lose his confidence or whatever. So yeah, I think there's a lot that you can learn from spring training. Does it tell the whole story? Obviously not all the time, but you can learn a lot, and those kids are learning a lot.
It's funny, right before you mentioned his name, I was pulling up Jackson Merrill's page, because that's the next guy I wanted to ask you about. And I think what was impressive last year, first off, when we saw him in the clubhouse, like, Jackson's got a couple more inches on him than I expected. Like, it's a tall, well-built kid, coming out of like a couple years out of high school. Like, and then, obviously taking some infield with, Bogarts and those guys. But what was clear was, like, he's driven, and the talk last year is he really wanted to start at AA. And I'm sure when we get a chance to talk to him next week, it's going to be, how motivated are you to be with the club sooner rather than later? And, I'm sure every kid wants that, but there was kind of a different vibe with him. Like, he's very driven and motivated, and feels like maybe it's a chip or something. Like, he's got something to prove, and he wants to go out there and do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And first of all, the physicality that you mentioned, it shocked me too last year. In fact, when I first saw him in his locker, I was kind of, who's that standing in Merrill's? Oh, that's him. Oh, okay. He's 2 years out of high school. I was expecting to be looking like, like a 19. This kid looks like he's 24, 25. Yeah. So he does have that internal fire and push. And to be honest with you, that's one of the things that the Padres front office, every front office is evaluating with their players, right? Obviously, he's your guy, right? You've invested in him. He is a high draft pick, so everyone's looking at you. And you're going to have a natural bias in terms of feeling like all the things that you like about that player. But it's also important as an organization that you're looking at things honestly in terms of, okay, how are the intangibles? We've seen him now for a little while. Does he have that fire? Does he have the work ethic? Is he going the extra mile? How is he as a teammate? How does he handle adversity? All those types of things. And those types of things start to reveal themselves more when he's actually in your organization and you're seeing him on a daily basis. There have been some players in the past where, the front office has realized, hey, great talent in a lot of ways, but there's some questions maybe about the work ethic or the internal fire. With Merrill, that's one of the things that I've continually heard from everybody in the organization, is that he has that, like you described. And that's certainly one of those things that makes you, when you talk about trades, and some people went, how could you trade that guy? Well, maybe we saw some things in him that, made him a little bit more tradable than this other guy. And so there's everything about Jackson Merrill has been, this kid physically has it, emotionally has it. the acumen and his ability to learn is all there, and the fire, as you mentioned, is definitely there. So that becomes a thing of, okay, now the organization has to find that balance of, okay, do you push him and let him guide the way? He'll tell you sort of what the next step is, or do you have to rein some things in because you still see some things that might become stumbling blocks at the big league level? But hey, that's, for me as an organizational guy, I want to see guys champing at the bit to get there and pissed off if they're not being pushed to the next level, because that's the kind of fire that you want to see out of those guys.
Yeah. Can you give me 3 guys that you're excited, like once you get on the property there at the complex, that you're like, oh, I can't wait to run out and see this guy throw or this guy hit? And, obviously everybody likes to see Fernando Tatis Jr. in the cage and Manny Machado and all that. There's some new arms and so, but are there, a few guys that you're like, I'm really looking forward to laying eyes on them?
Well, a lot of new guys, right? I mean, obviously I want to see Jackson Merrill's progress. I want to see Marcy. I haven't seen a ton of him. So I'm really anxious to see what he can bring to the table, because that's a possible outfield candidate right away. The other thing is, don't be surprised if we see Jackson Merrill or Pauly doing some work. They're infielders traditionally, but they might get some work in the outfield as well. So I think maybe more so this year than last year. I'm really anxious to see some of these young prospects. Same thing with who else do we have? Salas. I mean, the young catcher. I mean, he opened up my eyes last year, so I'm anxious to see his growth again this year. I mean,
what struck you about him?
And the reason more this year than last year, I think, isn't necessarily because we've heard more about these names. It's more a thing of maybe there's more of a chance that we're going to see some of these guys over the course of the year. Last year's roster, you felt like this is pretty much set. There's not going to be a whole lot happening unless some guys get injured. I think this is a more fluid situation this year. And that's exciting, because when you're one of these young guys coming into camp, you're realizing, I'm going to push Manny Machado out of third base, right? And it's like, those guys aren't going anywhere. Even in the starting rotation last year, like Snell, Waka, Lugo, Darvish, those guys aren't going anywhere. I mean, you stay ready and you don't wish bad upon anybody, but the reality is, everything goes well, those guys are going to be the guys, and maybe you'll get some spot starts. Maybe you help out in the bullpen or something like that. But this year, I think it's a little different. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a fluid situation. And so the young guys would be like, I'm not wishing bad on anybody, but it's just there's going to be opportunity this year. And I want to be the guy that's going to be ready to go. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on those young guys. I'm anxious to see Jake Cronenworth. I want to see how he's doing, swinging the bat and what he's been working on to get himself to get back on track. I think a lot of what Jake might have been going through last year was just the natural human reaction of getting a big contract. As much as you kind of want to poo-poo that, like, oh, that should make things easier for you. Not necessarily, right, Darnay? I mean, I'm sure you've talked to some guys where there's a different level of expectation, both on yourself and you feel like externally in terms of what you're supposed to do, and you've got to live up to this thing now. So I'm just kind of curious to see how much maybe more relaxed Jake is this year and just getting himself back on track. So there's a lot of things that are going to be fun to watch this spring.
Well,
how about you? You have a list of certain things you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, and I mean, on Jake, I'm sure the contract got heavier once he started struggling too. It might not have been an issue right off the bat, but once you're into the season and you're scuffling, then that's probably, I would think, when you really feel the weight of it. I think, a lot of what you said, the young guys for sure, because we've seen highlights from all these guys, but you don't really get a super close look at them, and so seeing them, certainly Michael King, I think, no doubt, him potentially being kind of the number 3 there, and just the phenomenal finish he had as a starter in New York. Is he able to just kind of basically continue that on? And because again, like, not having the same astute eye that you do, for me, it's just as much like what guys are saying, what you're hearing, what you see in the clubhouse, and then, catching some of those live BPs, you know what I mean? And seeing guys battle and that sort of thing. And then obviously once the games get going, kind of seeing who's popping, and then what sustains, like you said, once kind of the competition ramps up a little bit. What will you be watching with Yuki Matsui and Usuck Go. Two guys that come over from overseas that like, can they be high leverage late inning guys? Are they like innings eaters, kind of a Nick Martinez role, kind of depending? Like what do you hope to see? Will you be kind of, watching closely as far as they go and kind of gauging, okay, this is where we can slot them in?
Yeah, it's always interesting, right? When they're the guys coming from the different countries. And we saw the transition that it took for Ha-seong Kim his first year. I mean, he said he lost 20 pounds the first month he was over here, just from the stress and the change of culture and the change of food and, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I am curious to see how those guys adjust, as you're mentioning, but also to see the stuff. The cool thing about it is you've got two guys that were actually dominant in their respective leagues, both in the Korean League and the Japanese League, dominant closer type guys. So, Robert Suarez seems to be the heir apparent to taking over that closer role. But what a great feeling of knowing you've got this additional depth of Matsui and Go to be able to step in and get the job done. And a righty-lefty combination at that was Suarez and Matsui. So, that's pretty cool. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing what their style is, what their stuff is, and just how it plays. Because remember, it's a different feel for the baseball for those guys. In talking to guys that have played in those leagues, the mounds are different. They're much softer and sandier, I think, is what I've heard. So, there's going to be an adjustment for those guys, but I'm anxious to see what they do. And again, talking about the bullpen and the strengths and the weaknesses of this club, I feel like, okay, you lost Josh Hader, you lost an amazing established closer, no question about it. But at the same time, the kind of depth that this bullpen might have this year, I think has a chance to far exceed what the bullpen depth was last year. And that actually can become maybe a really important strength for Mike Shildt over the course of the season in terms of the different guys he can go to, not having to rely on one guy each day. And if Suarez pitches 2 or 3 days in a row, closing out games, it's not the end of the world because you've got Go that can come in and get it done, or, you've got options. So I'm excited to see if that actually becomes one of the strengths of this team this year. And that versatility really gives Mike Shildt a lot of different options over the course of the season.
And I don't think we've gotten the official word on Wandy Peralta either. So there's another one that will join the mix. And it's interesting as far as the arms go. You got 3 clear starters, and maybe they add another, but there's not a lack of bodies there that can factor in with Brito, with Vasquez, with Avila, potentially Morhone, Drew Thorpe coming off a great season. Like, there's a lot of guys. And so I think that's another one of the key storylines, like who gets built up, who shows that they can handle it, who pitches well once the games start, and how does that shake out in terms of, okay, you're 4 and 5, you're a Nick Martinez role, and kind of on down the line.
I agree with you 100%. And that's going to be, again, one of the differences of last year versus this year in terms of the strengths. Where does it lie? Last year was like, you get your 5 starters. The year before that, the Padres had 6 or 7 guys that were legitimate starters. And so you felt like, okay, if they can cover enough, maybe some deficiencies and lack of depth in the pen, but it's okay because our starters should get through. It's gonna be a different way of managing the entire pitching staff this year for Mike Shildt. And honestly, there were some games last year, especially early in the season, where the Padres long men really struggled. And it kind of went overlooked because you figure, they were losing 2-0 when he came in anyway. And then it ended up, you're down by 5 and it was a loss and whatever. But those were games that the previous year, the Padres stayed in, and it's a 2-0 game. And the next thing you know, it's 2-1. And all of a sudden it's 3-2 because of the offense that you have and you're putting pressure on their bullpen. And I felt like there were a lot of those types of opportunities that slipped by last year early in the season. And I don't see that happening as much this year with, whether it's Brito or Vasquez or Avila or Waldron, these different guys that potentially could be on the back end of the pen. Those guys could be really important this year in terms of taking some of the pressure off the starting rotation, but also keeping the team in the games to continue to put pressure on the other team's bullpen and give this offense a chance to get into games. So I'm looking at it as, okay, maybe the rotation not as established right now. Great opportunity for some guys to step up, but also because of the versatility that you mentioned and listed, we might see a lot of guys moving around in different roles, but ultimately giving you more depth and more strength throughout the game to stay in games over the course of the season. So I'm not viewing that as a negative right now at all.
We mentioned the bullpen. You mentioned Josh Hader no longer being around. I should ask you about his comments that I'm sure many people have heard. I believe it was on Foul Territory. Talking about how it started with him in terms of not wanting to go multiple innings. He talked about when he was with the Brewers, they basically said, hey, that's not your values in getting saves. And so that kind of became his focus. And so in the season, it's like, hey, surround me with the right guys that can set me up to do what I need to do in the ninth. And hey, if it's a playoff situation, it might be a different story. But then we saw it kind of rear its ugly head in September when he said something along the lines of like, well, are we in the playoff race? And at the time, not necessarily, but as it turns out, they ended up being pretty close, and every game kind of carried a lot of weight. Curious how much or how little you want to touch that with just Hader being kind of a polarizing subject amongst the fan base, and obviously some of the stuff that he said, and now this at points rubbing fans the wrong way.
Yeah, I think
when he's looking out, and he's looking out for his health. He's looking out for his health. He knows his values. That there's that whole component which you can understand to some degree as well.
Totally, 100%. From the player's perspective, you've only got one career. You've only got one arm. You've got a limited time to try to, establish yourself and make the most out of this opportunity. And, as a player, I think it's so individual in terms of what guys' experiences are in their organizations, right? If you're in an organization where you feel like they're looking out for me and they're taking care of my arm, they're keeping track of all this stuff, and even to the point where there are times where you're pissed off because you're getting taken out of the game or not being brought into a game where you feel like I should be going, but the organization, there's a balancing act there, right? Of the team looking out for you versus a player who feels like, no, I did everything they asked. I was a good soldier. I took the ball every time they asked me to get. I pitched 3 or 4 days in a row. I pitched multiple. I did all this kind of stuff, and which is fine. I did it. I was happy to do it. I was stepping up for my teammates. I was doing what everybody expected me to do as a competitor. And then you go to an arbitration hearing, and all they do is just completely dismiss all of the stuff that you feel like I put my career on the line to try to help this team and to do what you guys wanted me to do. And now we're sitting here and you're telling me to my face that it meant nothing to you. That hurts. And so that happens to players. I get where that guy is coming from. And the other flip side of that is, okay, I get that this is a business. I get that that's what they've got to do in an arbitration hearing. And I get that I need to look out for myself. And at the same time, I've got to go into that clubhouse on a daily basis and know that not only am I there for me and my family, but I've also got a responsibility to the other 24 guys or 25 guys now in that clubhouse, and to the city that I represent, the name that's on the front of this uniform, not the name that's on the back. And so it's a tricky balancing act. And again, I think some of it oftentimes has to do with individual guys' personal experience in terms of if they feel like they've been taken advantage of or abused or not appreciated for what they've done. They're going to be hypersensitive to that type of stuff. And there's other guys who may be like, I don't give a dang about arbitration and the money. It's all going to be there. I've already made more than I can ever ask for in my life. I am here for these guys in the clubhouse and this team, and I'm going for it, as long as to a point, right? I mean, there's a balance on it. So I get both sides of it. I totally get both sides of it. And, it's I came from a different era where it was, you take the ball, because if you don't, your teammates are going to be on you and be ripping you apart. But I think this is a different era where guys understand that, more so than ever, there's a business element to it. And I think it's an individual decision for each guy. So, and
I'm sure Padres fans will be watching closely now that he got paid, if there are any of these issues in Houston, and if they need him for 4 innings, or if they need him 3 days in a row, how does he kind of navigate that?
Something to keep an eye on for sure.
Couple quick ones. You'd mentioned Salas earlier, and I've been wanting to ask, what jumped out to you about him when you saw him last year?
How he was just, I only saw him in bullpens. All right. So again, I kind of flashed back to Austin Hedges, the first time I saw him catching a bullpen. And just from a pitcher's perspective, just you stand there and you're looking at your catcher and you want to have a rapport, right? And there's just certain guys where he's in command back there. He is in charge. I've got this. Go ahead. Let's go. Get right here. Let's go. Boom. I've got it. And I frame it and I make you look good right there. Way to go. And then the next one's not quite there. And you're like, it's okay. No problem. Let's go. Get back down here. Let's go. And they're with you. They're working with you and they're encouraging you. And you can tell that they're in command of what they're doing back there with their glove work and how they move and how they set up and just all of that kind of stuff that usually you wait years to get that type of a connection with a guy, right? And you hope that it's at the big league level. Like I've had some big league catchers where none of that was there. I was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing here? But to watch, I first saw it with Austin Hedges. The first bullpen I saw, he was probably 19 years old at the time. And I just thought, I'd love to pitch to that kid right now. It'd be fun. And I got the same sense out of Salas in just terms of the internal confidence, the understanding of what he was doing back there, how he was handling himself. And most importantly, the body language and the messaging that they're able to send to their pitcher. Because oftentimes that's what you need when you're standing on that mound and you're all alone and it's a 3-2 count with the bases loaded and you got 50,000 fans screaming and yelling at you and you've got pick a superstar, Manny Machado at the plate that you've got to get out. It makes a difference how that catcher is handling the situation and sometimes the courage and the confidence that he can then give to you simply by how he's putting down the signs, how he's handling himself back there, how he sets up that little, come on, man, let's go, little, that little type of thing. These kids have it. And it's something that's, some guys have it, some guys learn it, some guys never get it. But you could just get a sense with Salas that this is a kid that already has a lot of those intangible qualities that some of them you just can't teach and other of them take years to develop, and he's already got them.
And mind you, he was 16 when you made this observation.
I know, that's a thing. It's stunning, really. I mean, when you think he was catching in winter league games, do you know how intense winter league games are? I went down there to get myself ready for the big leagues. People think, oh, you go to winter ball and it's kind of double-A. No, winter ball is intense. Those guys are there to win. If you don't win, you're going to be on a plane going back home. That's assuming that you didn't get shot as you're coming out of the clubhouse because somebody lost some money on you betting in the stands on that pitch. It's intense. And to think that kid was back there running the show for some of those winter league games, pretty darn impressive.
Last one. What do you want the mindset of this team to be coming off of last year, now kind of being this underdog role, seeing kind of what should have been a really promising season go by, mix of established vets, guys trying to prove themselves, the collective attitude of this team going forward should be what?
Pissed off? Is that, I was thinking about that, like, would I rather have a talented team or a motivated team? And I'll take the motivated team over the talented team any year. And I'm not saying that last year's team wasn't motivated. They were. I think a lot of things were going on. Just the expectations that they had for themselves externally that was going on. I think there's just so many factors, and I don't think you can point to any one of them or any one person or anything like that. But I think, if anything, the team this year should be really dissatisfied with what went on last year and a sense of determination of that's not going to happen again. And that has nothing to do with, who's on your roster, who's not on your roster. That's just a sense of, you know what, we expected more out of ourselves last year. The league expected more out of ourselves last year. And we're coming out with some fire and determination. Not that they weren't last year, but I just think there's going to be a different focus. And I think a realization of, sense of urgency early on, and that balance of, okay, we can't put too much pressure on ourselves, but at the same time, we've got to understand what do we need to do collectively as a team, not individually, not what am I, the superstar, going to do? What does that superstar need to do? What does that superstar? How do we, as just players, teammates, how do we come together and make this thing work from day one? And I'm hoping that there's going to be just some lessons learned from last year, and that level of intensity coming into this season to make sure that it's a more more productive and consistent campaign than I think anybody felt like they walked away from last year.
Yeah, I think we would all appreciate that. Scan, you're the best. Great seeing you. Great hearing your voice. Can't wait to do that through the course of the season again.
Yeah.
Excited about it. I hope to see you on Twitter again soon. Always appreciate your input on Twitter. You've had a nice little hiatus, I think, since Schultz presser. So maybe we get some of that insight back in digital form.
I need to take a little break from the Twitter machine. No question about it. So, but I always enjoy it. It's fun during the season. It's fun to interact with the fans, and I always appreciate the fans when they come up and they say hi to me. They talk to me. Through Twitter, through the HeyScan@Cox.net email, all of it. As I love being a part of baseball. I love the job in terms of being around the game, being around the players. But one of the things that really is the funnest thing for me is the interaction that I get to have with the fans, talking baseball with them, both during good times and bad. And it helps me to stay alert. I learn a lot from them. Hopefully we're having fun and they're learning from me as well. So always appreciate the interaction, and I'll be back on Twitter. And I always appreciate talking ball with you, Darnay. It's really fun. I know you spend a lot of time at the clubhouse, a lot of time following this team. I have a ton of respect for what you do because you're covering all these different sports and everything, but you're actually there. You're on site. You're keeping an eye on things. And so what you're talking about is authentic, and a ton of respect for you for doing that, and look forward to seeing you out there in the desert.
Oh, appreciate it. Far too kind. It means a lot, especially coming from you. And I always learned a ton when we have you on, or even when we just cross paths out there at the ballpark. And excited to do so again in person very soon. To see you next week, I think at some point in Peoria will be great. So thanks as much. Great catching up, and look forward to doing so again soon. Thanks, Cam.
Thanks, Fernando. Let's have a great season.